Okay, I want to move on now and talk about some of the irreversible additions of very strong bases and good nucleophiles to carboxylic acid derivatives. And these strong bases are most commonly C- carbanions. Of course, carbon would have 3 other bonds, so I'll write R3, or hydride ions, H-. These are strong bases, poor leaving groups, and therefore, when they attack a carbonyl, they cannot fall back off. That is an irreversible process. So let me just discuss the reagents first. Our sources of C- generally are going to be Grignard reagents, where you have a very polar carbon-magnesium bond, or organolithium reagents. And these are going to be essentially equivalent. They behave as if the metal is participating in an ionic interaction, not a covalent bond. In reality, that's not true, but in this course, you'll get away with treating this as R- with a lone pair, as if carbon owns that lone pair and wants to give it up to either an acid or an electrophile. Forms of H- include lithium lunohydride, which of course is quite hydridic, very strong reducing agent.